Imagine this. You're walking through a crowd on a sunlit street. The air is alive with conversation, laughter, the faint smell of coffee and perfume. Everyone looks polished, composed, confident. You glance around, faces smiling, voices upbeat, movements purposeful. But something feels wrong. It's not what you see, it's what you don't. No one seems real. You catch a woman rehearsing her laugh before joining a group. A man adjusts his posture, then his expression, before he begins to speak. Another scrolls through his phone, not searching, but curating, selecting which moment of his life will look most alive. Everyone seems to be playing a role, and you begin to wonder, so are you. You laugh on cue. You say I'm fine before checking in with your own body. You nod along to things you don't agree with. You shrink parts of yourself that might offend. You amplify traits that earn praise, and you realize you've become an echo of what the world wants from you. But here's the twist. The world rewards you more for the mask than for the face. Underneath, authenticity is celebrated in theory, but punished in practice. You're told to be yourself, but only if yourself doesn't disturb the collective script. Too quiet, you're dismissed. Too intense, you're avoided. Too honest, you're offensive. Too vulnerable, you're weak. So like everyone else, you adapt, you perform, you become fluent in the language of likeability, and the better you get at it, the more approval you receive. It works. You get invited. You get promoted. You get followed. You get applauded. But something inside you begins to die. The parts you edited out start to rot in the silence. The parts you magnified start to feel like costumes that never come off. And eventually, a quiet voice whispers in the back of your mind, they don't love you. They love who you pretend to be. And then comes the existential ache. If love, success, and belonging all depend on a version of you that isn't fully true, then do you actually belong anywhere? What happens when your most celebrated self is also your most fabricated? What happens when the very thing you crave connection is built on a performance so subtle you forgot it was an act? What happens when the metrics of success favor not truth, but presentation? Think about social media. Authenticity is trending, but only the aesthetic of it. Crying on camera is brave if it's lit well. Being raw is profitably if you're still attractive. Being real is rewarded, but only if it performs well. And beneath it all, a deeper paradox. We've turned authenticity into a performance, and then started judging ourselves by how well we perform being real. Let that settle in your chest, because this isn't just about social media. It's your workplace, your relationships, your family, your sense of self. You modulate your tone in meetings. You suppress discomfort at family dinners. You dress your pain in humor among friends. You apologize for your needs in love, not because you want to, but because it's what the system favors. A polished version of you, predictable, pleasant, marketable, but at what cost? How many people go their entire lives never speaking in their real voice? How many die never having been truly seen? How many are loved for their masks and mourned for a self no one ever knew? What kind of world are we building when we reward the curated over the honest, the socially smooth over the emotionally raw, the safe over the sincere? Here's a terrifying thought. What if you've built your whole life on a version of you that was designed for applause nor truth? And what if every reward, every compliment, every promotion you've ever received was not a sign of your authenticity being valued, but a sign of how well you've hidden it? Does that make you successful, or just really good at disappearing? You see, This goes beyond insecurity. It's not just about self-esteem or confidence. It's a structural issue, a cultural machine that feeds on inauthenticity because the raw, the real, the messy truth of being human doesn't sell well. This machine has taught you something corrosive. Your true self is not enough, and so you spend your life earning your worth piece by abandoning the very parts of yourself that made you human. But why does this machine exist? Why do we, collectively and unconsciously, reward the inauthentic while punishing the real? Why is the mask not only safer, but more profitable? And what is the psychological, philosophical scaffolding that holds this entire illusion in place? You're about to find out. Let's peel back the curtain. Let's look into the roots of this haunting reward system. The hidden architecture that makes authenticity feel like rebellion and inauthenticity feel like survival. Asterisk, asterisk, are you ready to descend into the source of this distortion? Then let's move to the next section. The descent doesn't begin with deception. It begins with fear. Long before you ever consciously chose to perform, you learned that truth had consequences. Maybe it was the way your parents reacted when you cried too much. Maybe it was the teacher who rewarded silence over curiosity. Maybe it was the friend who drifted away the moment you shared something raw. You don't remember the first moment you began to hide, but you remember how safe it felt. You learned that authenticity comes with risk, and that risk, over time, became something intolerable. Carl Jung called this the formation of the persona, the social mask you wear to adapt to the world. He never condemned the mask. In fact, he saw it as necessary, but he warned us. The persona is a system of behavior that is partially imposed upon the individual by society. It is a compromise between individual and society as to what a man should appear to be. The problem isn't that we have masks, it's that we forget we're wearing them. The mask becomes the face, and slowly the real self slips into the shadows. Now, combine that with what Friedrich Nietzsche described as Ressentiment, self-loathing that arises when people suppress their authentic instincts to fit into a moral system they didn't create. He believed modern morality was often a tool of the weak to shame the strong, the wild, the true. In our time, it's become even more subtle. We no longer burn the heretics, we unfollow them. We no longer stone the outcasts, we deplatform them. We no longer silence the honest with chains, but with algorithms, social pressure, and the weaponization of shame. The result? A society full of people who mistake conformity for goodness and likability for virtue. A society where the metric for truth is how digestible it is. Speak your truth, they say, but not like that. So we dilute, we polish, we preface. We laugh nervously before confessing something real. We say, just kidding, after revealing something raw, and each time, we reinforce the same lie, that only the inauthentic is acceptable. But what causes this conditioning to run so deep? Modern psychology points to a profound human need. Belonging. According to Abraham Maslow, after food, water, and safety, the most urgent human desire is to belong. We're social creatures wired to survive in groups. And for most of human history, exclusion from the group meant death. Your nervous system still operates on that ancient truth. When someone rejects your vulnerability, it doesn't feel inconvenient. It feels fatal. So we adapt, we shapeshift, we betray the self too, maintain the tribe, and then society rewards us for it. The reward isn't just social approval. It's economic. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that most people are motivated not by the pursuit of truth, but by the avoidance of suffering. Modern capitalism exploits this beautifully. Authenticity is unpredictably, doesn't scale. It's hard to sell something to a person who knows themselves deeply, who doesn't chase validation, who isn't haunted by unhealed wounds. But someone wearing a mask, they're perfect consumers. They're buying things to fill an identity gap they can't name. They need the latest product, the latest look, the latest way to seem enough. So corporations market authenticity while profiting from insecurity. Just be yourself, they whisper, right after telling you who you should be. Jung in Being and Nothingness warned of this dynamic when he wrote about bad faith, a state of self-deception where a person denies their own freedom by pretending they are merely what society expects of them. In bad faith, you start acting not as yourself, but as a character, not because you're lying, but because it's easier than confronting the burden of freedom. Because if you admit you're free to be authentic, then you also have to admit you've chosen not to be. You've let others decide your identity. You've traded your truth for comfort. But why does it feel so hard to do otherwise? Because authenticity threatens the system. An authentic person disrupts the pattern. They are harder to categorize, harder to control, harder to exploit. They speak even when it's inconvenient. They say no when compliance is expected. They don't participate in groupthink. In short, they are dangerous, and society, in response, punishes them in quiet but brutal ways. They're labeled too intense, too emotional, too much. Their confidence is mistaken for arrogance, their silence for weakness, their boundaries for selfishness. They are not easy to reward because they cannot be manipulated by shallow validation, so the system adapts. It builds institutions, schools, offices, digital platforms that reward compliance and emotional camouflage. You get better grades not for thinking deeply, but for saying what's expected. You get promoted not for originality, but for being agreeable. You gain followers not for truth, but for timing, aesthetics, and charm. The machine grinds forward, rewarding masks, punishing truth, and yet we continue to feel the ache. Because no amount of success makes up for feeling invisible in your own life. No number of compliments quiets the part of you that wonders, would they still love me if they really knew me? This is the hidden architecture, the psychological scaffolding, the philosophical illusion, a world that teaches you to abandon your authenticity and then applauds your ability to do it beautifully. But what happens when everyone complies? What happens when an entire society forgets what real even feels like? What are the emotional, cultural, and spiritual consequences of living in a world built on beautifully crafted lies? We're about to go even deeper, because in the next section, we'll examine the unseen consequences of this epidemic, how it subtly infects our relationships, our self-worth, our culture, and even our capacity to love. You think you're fine. You smile. You nod. You perform the identity you've been rehearsing for years. You tell yourself this is what it means to be successful, mature, respected. But underneath, there's a slow leak. Something hollow. Something quietly unraveling. You can't name it, but you feel it. The friendships feel ... shallow. The praise feels like it's meant for someone else. The laughter feels performative. And every night, when the world finally stops watching, you're left wondering why it all feels so empty. This is what happens when the inauthentic becomes normalized, not just in individuals, but in entire systems, entire cultures. At first glance, it looks like everything is working. The social media feeds are full of perfect lives, The companies are thriving, the parties are full, the dating apps are crowded, but scratch just beneath the surface and what you find isn't connection. It's a silent epidemic of alienation. Loneliness has never been higher. Depression, anxiety, and suicide rates continue to rise, especially among the young. People scroll through endless images of smiling faces and feel more disconnected than ever. Why? Because we are surrounded by projections, not people. And when you compare your raw, unfiltered self to someone else's carefully curated mask, you will always feel inadequate. This is one of the most insidious consequences of inauthenticity. We don't just fake ourselves, we create an entire simulation of reality that others then compare themselves to. And the result? Everyone's lying to each other, while secretly wondering why they feel like they're the only ones lying. This is not just a cultural glitch. This is a neuropsychological trap. Your brain is a pattern-detecting machine. It relies on mirror neurons to make sense of social cues, to feel empathy, to connect. But when the cues are false, the brain still responds as if they're real. So, when someone pretends to be happy, others feel a subtle pressure to match it. When someone suppresses their truth, others feel compelled to hide theirs too. Over time, this creates a feedback loop, a collective agreement to keep up appearances, at the expense of reality. This is how cultures die from the inside out. Not through war, not through poverty, but through emotional dishonesty. We trade truth for harmony, authenticity for acceptance, depth for ease, and soon even the most intimate relationships begin to fracture. You say, "I love you," but what you really mean is, "I love the version of me I'm allowed to be around you." You listen, but you're not really hearing, you're preparing your next socially acceptable response. You touch, but it feels more like performance than presence. And slowly, you start to forget what real love even feels like. Because how can you be truly loved if no one has ever truly seen you? This is the invisible violence of inauthenticity. It doesn't just cost you your truth, it robs you of being known. We crave connection, but connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is impossible when we're performing. So we live in a paradox, starving for intimacy. While terrified of being seen, Aldous Huxley foresaw this. In Brave New World, he warned of a future where people are not oppressed by pain but by pleasure, not silenced by fear but by distraction. A world where authenticity becomes obsolete not through force, but through seduction. And here we are, distracted by endless entertainment, sedated by convenience, addicted to approval, not because we're weak, but because the system has been engineered to reward obedience and punish truth. Even our heroes have become inauthentic. The influencers, the politicians, the spiritual leaders, everyone plays a role. Even rebellion has become a brand. Real dissent doesn't trend. Real depth doesn't scale. Real transformation isn't sexy. So instead, we elevate the illusion of authenticity, edited vulnerability, polished rawness, monetized introspection. It's not that no one wants to be real, it's that no one knows how anymore, because the cost is too high. And this isn't just philosophical. There are physiological consequences. When you suppress who you are, your body takes the hit. Gabor Maté, a physician and trauma expert, has shown how chronic self-abandonment can lead to autoimmune diseases, chronic stress, and even cancer. When you habitually deny your emotions, your immune system begins to treat you as the enemy. Because at the deepest level, the body knows Lying to survive is still dying, just more slowly. We were not built for masks. We were not built for endless self-editing. And yet, here we are. A world of exhausted performers, confusing applause for nourishment. And the most tragic part, we've learned to distrust the real. When someone is truly vulnerable, we call them weak. When someone refuses to fake it, we call them difficult. When someone doesn't smile on command, we call them broken. So the cycle continues. We reward the inauthentic. Then we wonder why everything feels fake. We praise the polished. Then we wonder why no one feels alive. But beneath all this, beneath the makeup, the filters, the masks, something ancient is stirring. A quiet revolt, a hunger for something raw, something unscripted, something true. Because deep down, even the most skilled performers long for a stage they can walk off from. Even the best liars want to be believed when they finally tell the truth. So the question becomes, what if you stopped playing the role? What if you shattered the mask and let the world meet the unfiltered you? What would break? Who would leave? What would change? And more terrifyingly, what if you discover that you no longer know who you are without the act? This is the edge. Most people never dare to walk, but it is precisely where liberation begins, because only when the false self dies can the real self emerge. In the next section, we'll step into the rebellion, not a rebellion of violence, but of truth, of saying no to the roles, of reclaiming the courage to be whole, even if it costs you the world you once knew. It starts quietly, not with a grand announcement, not with fireworks or slogans, but with something far more dangerous, a decision. You wake up one day and choose not to lie, not to yourself, not to others, not even in the small, socially lubricated ways. You show up to work and stop pretending you're fine. You say no when you mean no. You say yes only when you truly mean yes. You pause before laughing at jokes you don't find funny. You stop agreeing just to be liked. And instantly, something strange happens. The world stares at you differently. You've broken the script. People flinch, confused. They don't know how to respond. You're not angry. You're not rebellious in the usual sense. You're just unwilling to perform. That, right there, is the first act of rebellion. Because society isn't built to handle the authentic, built to reward the agreeable, the palatable, the easy-to-digest version of you. The moment you begin living from a place of truth, you become unpredictable. And the system doesn't like unpredictable. But here's the truth. They never told you. You don't need to be liked to be free. You don't need to fit in to belong to yourself. You don't need the crowd's applause to feel whole. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But privilege doesn't come without cost. The path of authenticity will ask everything of you. It will take your masks, your roles, your comfort, your illusions, and it will give you only this in return. Yourself, that may not sound like much until you realize it's the one thing you've been unconsciously longing for all along. You begin noticing things. How often people talk, but don't really say anything. How many friendships are based on mutual enablement, not real connection. How most praise is given for conformity, not courage. And the more aware you become, the harder it is to go back. You see the cost of being inauthentic everywhere, on faces, in relationships, in eyes that smile without light behind them. And then, something radical happens. You start telling the truth, not aggressively, not to provoke, but as an act of liberation. You say things like, I don't know, I disagree, I feel hurt, I'm not okay, I need time, I changed my mind, I don't want to do this anymore. And with each sentence, your inner alignment sharpens. At first, people resist. Some distance themselves. Others call you selfish, dramatic, arrogant, unstable, because your authenticity forces them to confront their own disconnection. You become a mirror, and not everyone wants to see their reflection, but some lean in closer, some recognize the courage. They hear the tremor in your voice and think, maybe I can do that too. And this is how rebellion spreads, not through viral hashtags or massive protests, but through individual acts of truth-telling, through humans daring to show up raw in a world that rewards polish. History is full of those who walked this path. Skrin, Kierkegaard, who risked public disgrace to write openly about despair and faith. Simone Weil, who chose personal poverty to preserve her spiritual integrity. James Baldwin, who wrote with searing honesty about identity, race, and alienation. These weren't perfect people. They weren't saints. They were simply unwilling to live a life of pretend. Even Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, spoke of the ultimate freedom, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. That freedom begins not with external revolution, but with internal refusal. Refusal to shrink, to smile when you want to scream, to laugh when you feel like crying, to say yes when your soul is screaming no. But how do you begin, practically? Start here, slow down. Most inauthenticity is automatic. You've rehearsed it for so long, it feels natural. Interrupt the autopilot. Pause before you respond. Ask yourself, is this really what I want to say? Identify your masks. What roles do you play to feel safe? The achiever, the nice one, the strong one, the funny one. Question them. Where did they come from? Who taught you that was the only way to survive? Practice micro-truths. Don't wait for dramatic confessions. Start small. Tell someone how you actually feel. Decline a social event you don't want to attend. Speak your needs. It builds the muscle. Expect backlash. Some people will leave. Let them. Anyone who only loves the version of you that performs was never truly loving you anyway. Find your tribe. Seek out people who crave depth, who flinch at small talk and soften at sincerity. These people exist, but they're often hiding, just like you. This is not about becoming fearless. It's about becoming honest, even when fear is present. You will still feel nervous. You will still feel exposed, but you will also feel alive in ways you forgot were possible, because authenticity isn't a destination, it's a practice, a daily vow to return to yourself, to meet each moment without armor. Yes, it's vulnerable. Yes, it's messy, but it's also sacred, because when you strip away the act, what remains is something holy. Your unguarded truth, your unedited presence, your unrepeatable soul, and nothing, no applause, no status, no validation can compare to that. So here's the final question for this section. What are you still pretending to be, that you could finally let go of today? Because the more you drop, the more space you make, and in that space, the real you begins to breathe. In the final section, we'll walk to the heart of this journey to the ultimate truth. A realization so simple, so devastatingly clear, that once seen, it changes everything. There is a moment after the masks have been torn away, after the silence has been broken, after you've risked the collapse of everything you thought you needed when you arrive at the center of yourself, not the self you show on resumes, not the curated avatar you polish on social media, not even the one who plays the role of truth seeker, but the you that existed before the world told you who to be. It's a quiet, unfamiliar place at first, like returning to a home you barely remember. It doesn't announce itself with triumph. It's not a chorus of angels or a victorious drumbeat. It's just stillness. A stillness so vast it silences the noise of every external voice, and then you hear it, not from outside, but from deep within. You were never broken, not defective, not behind, not lost, just buried, under layers of survival strategies, conditioning, shame, fear, expectation. All this time, your inauthenticity wasn't a moral failure. It was a survival tactic, a necessary camouflage in a world that punishes difference and rewards imitation. But now, the hiding is over, and here's the devastatingly simple truth. There is no version of yourself more worthy than the one you already are. This isn't self-help fluff. It's not another motivational platitude. It's the realization every philosopher, mystic, and rebel has reached in their own language. Socrates said, "Know thyself." Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is within you." Rumi said, "You were born with wings. Why prefer to crawl through life?" Nietzsche declared, "Become who you are," all pointing to the same core truth. You are not here to perform. You are here to be. Being doesn't mean you are perfect. It doesn't mean you are always right, or always kind, or always sure. It means you are Holovan in your confusion, even in your pain. The moment you understand this, you stop chasing approval. Like a starving animal, you stop bending into shapes just to fit someone else's container. You stop trying to earn a right to exist, because you already exist. And that is the only proof you ever needed. You also begin to see something even more startling, that the society which rewards inauthenticity isn't powerful, it's terrified. Terrified of those who remember their truth. Because nothing threatens a system built on conformity more than a person who no longer needs its permission to live honestly. Think about it. The authentic cannot be manipulated. They can't be sold shame. They won't buy identity in exchange for obedience. They won't chase status at the expense of their soul. They disrupt simply by refusing to pretend. So of course the system fears them. Of course it mocks, exiles, or ignores them. But beneath that fear lies awe, because something in every human being remembers what it means to be real. That's why people are drawn to those who've reclaimed themselves, not because they are flawless, but because they are free, and now, you are one of them. The moment you stop negotiating your worth is the moment you start living, not surviving, not performing, living. You stop needing to be enough because you understand. Enough was a lie all along. There is no standard to meet, no finish line to crawl toward, no external trophy that can validate your internal truth. All there is this moment, and your willingness to meet it honestly. That's it. That's the whole game, to choose over and over against to be real, even when it costs you, especially when it costs you, because that cost, that pain, that social discomfort, it's the price of liberation, and you were born for it. So now you stand at a crossroads to the left, the old road, polished, paved, familiar, safe, but empty, echoing with the voices of who you were told to be. To the right, the unknown, trail, messy, overgrown, winding, but alive. It leads not to applause, but to peace, not to admiration, but to alignment. The question isn't which path is easier. The question is, which path belongs to you? You've already glimpsed the truth. You've felt the weight of the mask. You've tasted the relief of dropping it. So what happens now? Now you walk, not toward some perfect destination, but into deeper and deeper honesty. You become dangerous to falsehood, magnetic to the lost. You become a living invitation for others to remember who they are. And as your life begins to reflect your truth, something extraordinary happens. Not success, not fame, but resonance. You begin to attract people, places, work, and love that were always meant for the real you but could never find you through the performance. That is the final reward of authenticity. Not that the world bows to you, but that you stop bowing to the world. You rise, not arrogantly, but wholly, because you finally remember you were never meant to be normal. You were meant to be true, and there is nothing more powerful, more urgent, more needed in this fractured, hollow world than someone who refuses to abandon themselves again. So let me ask you one last time. Are you still willing to trade who you are for who they told you to be? Or are you finally ready to come home to yourself? Because that's where your life begins. And it always, always has been.